More than anything, I saw that classrooms that centered student joy and love and their natural curiosity were not only beautiful places to be, but were the places where kids learned the most. So it is an intentional stance that is against the standardization, the constant testing, and the top-down approach that happens in so many places in education.
This is Intentionally Ever After. Join intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek for a series of personal conversations and coaching sessions with various people about how living with intention shows up for them.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Intentionally Ever After. Today, I am absolutely delighted to be speaking with the renowned Penny Kittle. Penny, welcome.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yes, I'm very excited to speak with you. Penny, will you kindly introduce yourself to folks?
My name's Penny Kittle, and I am a teacher here in New Hampshire. I teach writing at Plymouth State University, and I do some writing myself. I've written 9 books that are about how to teach reading and writing. And the rest of my school year, travel to some places close and some places very far away to talk to teachers about creating classrooms that center joy.
Ooh, that center joy. That's great. I'll probably ask a little more about that throughout this call. What I'd like to do next, if you're open to it, is do kind of a rapid fire of the main questions, get a 1 or 2 liner from you, and then we'll dig in a little bit deeper.
I'm ready.
Does that work? Okay.
I'm ready.
Penny, what does it mean to live intentionally?
To know your purpose and stand by it.
Awesome. What is one change in habit that has had an exponential payoff?
I now paddleboard almost all of the time from the minute I can until it turns to late fall, winter here in New Hampshire.
What have you said no to that has made a significant impact in your life?
I actually have to say no a lot, and it's about balancing my schedule so that I have time for my granddaughters and things that bring me joy so that I can share joy.
What area in your life feels just about perfect?
My relationship with my granddaughters. From the minute my first one was born, I resigned my full-time job and started taking care of her 1 day a week. And then now I pick them up for grandma days, and it's just something I can cultivate exactly as I want it to be.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Who is someone you admire, and what do you admire about them?
So many. Can't I have lots of answers to this question?
No, absolutely not. Who is someone that comes to mind when I say that?
My husband.
Do you have a short list as to what you admire about him?
He is absolutely the poster for integrity, courage, honesty, love. He has high ethics. He holds people to them, but he also is filled with gentleness and kindness.
What do you imagine some people admire about you?
Well, one thing is that in September, I will start my 40th year of teaching. And in a time when we have a mass resignation of teachers, many people come up to me to say they're grateful that I'm still in the work. It brings me such joy. I can't imagine when I will give it up. But they also, I think, admire that somebody called me a straight shooter the other day. And someone else said that I inspire them because I'm a storyteller.
It can be helpful when someone tells you directly what they admire about you. You don't have to wonder.
I know, because
yeah.
I'm drawing on the conference I was at Thursday.
Perfect. And recency. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Penny Kittle, thank you so much. You are off the hot seat for the rapid fire section of the interview. Thank you very much. But now we're going to just go back through and go deeper. So the seat's going to get hot again, if you're okay with that.
I just want to comment that, you're very mellow. You got this lovely lighting. You invite me in, and then you go rapid fire. You got to come up with these answers, and you only get one. There's a little contrast there that I noticed. So just making an observation.
Thanks for calling that out. I appreciate that. We're going to edit that out, though, so no one's going to hear that. Henny, what does it mean to live intentionally? You mentioned joy. That was something that came up quite a bit. For this one in particular, you talked about knowing your purpose and standing by it.
So I, years ago in teaching, was invited to start coaching other teachers. And I told them that I would only do it if I could keep one class for myself, so that I would always have to be living what I was telling teachers I thought they should do. And that they would at any time be allowed to come in and watch me fail and watch me struggle and watch me recover and figure out how to do it better. And I always stuck to that. But during that process, of observing and coaching and living beside teachers, K-12, 5 elementaries, a middle and a high school for 15 years, more than anything, I saw that classrooms that centered student joy and love and their natural curiosity were not only beautiful places to be, but were the places where kids learned the most. So it is an intentional stance that is against the standardization, the constant testing, and the top-down approach that happens in so many places in education.
Without asking you to, well, maybe I will, but you respond to this as you wish. Why do you think it seems so counter? These movements, this top-down approach, why do you think it seems so counter to this centering around the student joy?
Well, I think that people outside of a deep understanding of learning believe that all kids can move at the same rate, or believe that all kids can reach the same places at the same time. And if you've ever been in a classroom of 25 little 8-year-olds, for example, you would instantly know that's not true. And you would also know that they all are interested in different things, and they have this need to collaborate. And we instead want them all at their own desks, answering questions that they didn't ask, and encouraging them to do the same kind of work. And what that creates is that you instantly have a competition, because all kids are doing the exact same thing all the time. Then they feel this, I'm never going to be good at this because she's better. So I've always been immersed in the reading and writing workshop model, which values the individual growth of kids. It allows you to have kids reading different things and all growing as readers, and it allows you to encourage them as writers to find their voice and their own creative organization for something. It requires a great deal from teachers. And what we know is true is that this country in particular doesn't trust teachers. And it's particularly bad right now. And if you don't trust who's with children, I would have to ask you, why did you hire them? And then I would have to say, if you don't trust them, they can never do their best work. They're always working in response to something someone else told them to do. So the whole question that you began with, that idea of living intentionally, is that I started a foundation, a nonprofit foundation, in response to the fact that teachers couldn't get money for classroom libraries. And I knew that what was happening in my classroom, where kids were becoming voracious, inspired, curious readers at any age, could happen if teachers had their hands on books. So in the last 10 years, we've raised over $1 million. We give 100% of what's donated to us to teachers. And we've put libraries in 400 classrooms across North America. We're not giving up, though. We also do professional learning in the summer. We have 1,400 teachers in a book club from 15 countries, and they all learn together. And we're determined to continue to support teachers who center joy and engagement and can continue to do this work, even in all kinds of settings that really get in the way.
That's great. That's great that you have such a movement behind this, despite the structures that are in place or the pressures maybe that aren't set up initially for success. That's it's very promising.
For
That's
sure.
great. I have yeah, it's fabulous. I have a very unrelated question, but it came up because you used the word voracious around reading. In what other instances has that word been used to describe anything else? That's the only thing I've heard it described is reading. Can you enlighten me here?
Wow, voracious. It really is about wanting to do something or go after something with your whole self. So you could think of a voracious skier, right? Who attacks the mountain or skis every single day. That would be an odd place to, but I don't use it a lot. I do use it with reading though.
Well, that's why I asked, and I figured I could ask you because I've only ever heard it for reading. I think it's a really powerful word, but thank you for being the subject matter expert.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So if it's insatiable, I'm a voracious consumer of chocolate. So it could be used elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna endeavor to use it more frequently and outside of that context. Thanks for playing along. Can you help me understand for yourself about your intentional lifestyle? What are the things that you insist upon in order to live intentionally?
Our home is a collaboration. So from the very beginning, when we had our children, we had to share things and who does what and how. So teaching our kids that family meeting time meant you could bring a problem or an issue to the table. We made our home a place where readers live. We've filled our house with books, as you can see, but this is only my office of books. And we had planned reading time as a family. We read aloud all the way through all 7 books of the Harry Potter series with our children. And I think that's one piece, right? That helps sustain my ability to do my work in very different ways. I do a lot of traveling, for example, and somebody had to hold down the fort from the beginning. And the other thing is that I read across ideas, values, beliefs, and experiences that I haven't had so that I deepen my own understanding and empathy for places I haven't been. And there's always just so much more to learn. Intentionally, I love driving an hour to work through the mountains, listening to podcasts or wonderful music and preparing myself to be in my classroom as someone who truly loves life.
That's fantastic. Would you mind sharing a little more detail about your family meeting times? Maybe logistically for folks who think that sounds intriguing or appealing, which I do.
So conflicts always happen in families, and it was easier to resolve conflicts by saying, if it was in the heat of the moment between our kids, for example, or directed at us for making rules, let's schedule a family meeting time, which allows everybody to cool off because, it is maybe going to be a couple hours from now after dinner, or perhaps we need to move it to the next day or so. And there's nothing official about them. Everybody got comfortable. We faced each other always. And then it could be about one thing, or it could be about 2 or 3 things, but we kept them short so that it was never a feeling of like a board meeting or something, but rather let's try to work on this. And I can remember we got 2 cats because they really wanted cats. And my husband and I, neither one of us really like cats. And the kids had promised, as all do, to clean the litter box, et cetera. And they weren't. And so Pat or I would call a family meeting. You guys, it's making us frustrated. And you're able to teach your kids how to name their feelings, how to resolve conflicts, how to have conversations when you are in close proximity to somebody that you disagree with quite a bit. And that, I think, it's such an important piece of parenting, is to teach your kids the language of resolving conflicts. What
a great way of modeling it as well, and being part of it, and not just go go tell your sister you said you're sorry, or make them, give a hug, or,
Oh, we did that too.
no. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? But you showed another
Right,
way. You
right.
were part of that as well. And I that's fabulous. In the planned reading time, this sounds like something that maybe fewer families might do. Can you tell us what
Yeah.
that looked like or still does?
So I'll tell you one of the reasons why. There's a new book out by Daniel William. I don't know his last name. We'll have to fix that for the producer.
Sure.
He wrote a book called Why Do Kids Hate School? And then his newest one is called The Reading Mind. And what he explains, he's a cognitive psychologist, I believe, that leisurely reading is what everyone has lost. So if you're sitting on a plane and you see you're the only one with your head in a book, that's one of the examples. And you'll notice it if you start looking for it. And he says the reason is the number of options. And so one of the things that I'm so struck by with parents, they will tell me now, none of us are readers, or we just really don't like reading, or they'll read on their phones. And what we're talking about is sustained engagement with something over hundreds of pages. And there is this famous research in a book called Proust and the Squid by Marianne Wolf. She was at Tufts then, that talks about a biliterate brain, that we have brains that can skim scan for information and get things quickly. And that's useful in this modern age. But there's wiring in our brain that goes back a millennia where we can read, we can sustain engagement with something. And the truth is we're losing that wiring because we aren't practicing it. And so the idea that it doesn't truly matter to me what the book is, but I want kids to experience the entire arc of a story across 300 pages. I want them to experience that deep dive into being transported. And the only way to do that is to develop the stamina first to stay with something that long. And so what you have is, the skim across your phone reading, that click and go, that fast thing does not develop stamina. It develops something else entirely. And so if you think about it, everyone's going to read. You guys, it's reading time. Doesn't matter what you read. But in my house, our kids were young before phones. I would have been more adamant about it now, but I would always say not on your phone. And what I always talk to parents and to kids about, and teachers, is there's a balance needed in everything. And kids have enough time on their screens. They don't need more time than that. So during that 30 minutes, they can be reading a book. They can be reading a magazine. They can be something that sustains their engagement. And over time, this comfortable feeling of all of us are curled up with whatever it is. And your heart rate begins to slow after 6 minutes of reading. One thing my students always tell me, because it's a part of what we do in my work, is that they never knew reading could cause them to feel calmer, less anxious about the world, just reading by itself. And it's true because you are relaxing into reading. So family reading time, create it however you want, but make it this sacred time when everybody gets to relax into what they're reading. And, I know some families have conversations after, or, we didn't always talk about our reading, but sometimes it morphs into let's all read this together. And then somebody reads aloud and everybody listens. And
that's great. So potentially it could effectively become a family book club, but the importance was about carving aside the time, not being on your screen. And I imagine there's benefits to everyone doing it at the same time. Everyone, again, the kids seeing the parents doing it as well. So it wasn't at any point a form of punishment, or, you got to make sure you do your reading before you do anything else. It just seems
I think
you cared about your children's development.
Yeah, it's like we all have to be human. If a kid falls asleep while they're reading during that time, I don't wake them up and be like, get back to your reading, right? But it's this sense of, did we have nights we skipped it? Yeah, because somebody had hockey out of town, or but we made it enough of a routine that they knew how much it mattered and they experienced the joy of reading.
Yeah. Yeah. How about these days, your daughters, are they readers? Would you say they're readers?
The granddaughters?
Or even granddaughters, yeah.
Yeah, no, everybody in our family is still a reader. We all read a lot. And my granddaughters, it's the perfect example. You fill your house with books and you put them in their path, and they are read to every night and they go to the library and they develop a love of reading, but we know they won't sustain it without continual joy in their lives from books. It can't all be hard. It can't all be because you have to.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you for sharing that as well. The one change in habit that for you has had an exponential payoff. You mentioned paddleboarding. Can you share more about that?
Well, it was early COVID, and here in New Hampshire, we're a very rural community with a lot of outdoor space. And my daughter and I rented paddleboards one afternoon. We'd never done it. And she was up here teaching from our house for 8 months when it first shut down the world. And we went to, my husband and I had tried it on vacation, and we went to a lake. She picked it up very quickly, and we both immediately could feel that the rest of the world kind of disappeared. Because when you are paddleboarding, you're rarely surrounded by other people, and especially here in our state. And we started, seeking different lakes we could try and seeing how long we went before we wanted to come back. And one of the things I noticed right away is that we split up. We would start out from shore at the same time, but we would disappear into and there was such a meditative thing. You have nothing else to do but notice the birds and the dragonflies and the wind in the trees and how the lake shifts when a boat goes by, or, what it feels like to stay balanced. And we, after only a few times, were dying to buy our own paddle boards. We didn't, but we wanted to. And then to have a place where we didn't have to strap them to the car. It's like one of my failings as a human is I struggle with all of those kinds of things. I kept setting them up wrong, and my husband would come home and be like, why did you do it this way? So we eventually bought a camp on a lake, and that's where we store everything. And Pat and I paddle from the minute it is warm enough. The ice is gone on the lake until we can't anymore.
That's great. Can you describe briefly the area of New Hampshire? So New Hampshire, for those who don't know, is a beautiful state in and of itself, but the particular region that you live in, that used to live in as well, is even different than, say, southern New Hampshire. Yeah,
the White Mountains. So we're in the center of the state, and it's also the center of tourism because we're surrounded on all sides by the White Mountains and so many lakes and rivers and biking trails, but a still relatively small permanent population. We have 2 million visitors a year. So that swells the, restaurant offerings, and there's lots to do here, but you have to love being outdoors, I think, because we snowshoe all winter through beautiful parks and places, but you have to like that if you want to live here.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's great. So what does the paddleboarding community happen, or what happens to it when the tourists come to town? Is it slightly busier where you're at, or are you still protected from that somewhat?
So I don't know a paddleboarding community. I think that's an interesting thought all on its own. We have a class at my university, paddleboarding, that is all about riding and paddleboarding. So that's kind of cool. But I would say there are just not that many paddleboarders in the state of New Hampshire. So I never see that many. I see a lot of kayakers and boaters and water skiers, but.
Well, good. All right. We'll keep it a secret. Maybe we'll just edit this part down to a few seconds, then we won't spread the word. So this is daily, then you say you try to get out there on a regular basis. I try to every single morning when the lake is completely flat, when it's like glass is the best time to be out. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. What have you said no to that has made a significant impact on your life? The biggest was saying no to my full-time everyday work at the high school. And I knew that if I work at Plymouth 2 days a week now, and so that would open up space for me to decide what to do with my time. So that's the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of privilege bound up in that I can decide to only work part-time, but I'm 61, so I'm pretty close to, retiring. But it was just the idea of saying, I need more space to make decisions about what I do. Time to write, time to
I don't know. I work in all kinds of different spaces because I have the time to.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's very big about managing your time, your schedule. And in the
Mhm.
rapid fire section, you mentioned the minute your granddaughter was born that you resigned the one job. So that seemed very clear to you that you've got this new
Mhm.
commitment, this new priority, and there's got to be room for it. So it sounds like
Yeah.
that was a big piece for you.
Yeah. It's just one of those. To tell you the truth, my phone, I never had my phone in class. And the day that they had gone into the hospital, I brought it to class and I said to my students, I've actually even got it on because when she's born, I want to know. And all of a sudden the phone rang in class and I didn't even like notice. And the student goes, Miss Kittle, it's the baby. And I was like, oh my God, I was crying before I even answered the phone. And I
Yeah.
just knew that to have this relationship with my granddaughter and now two of them was going to be more important than anything I could imagine I still had to do as a full-time teacher at the high school. So
Yeah.
it was just that clear to me. I hung up the phone and thought, that's it. I need more time.
Yeah, that's great. It's nice when things are that clear and obvious.
Hey, it's time on the planet, Joe. You got to live long enough to know exactly what works and what doesn't. These would be very different answers if you were talking to me at 30.
Well, that's fair. I think that's fair. So, relatedly, what do you struggle maybe still to say no to?
Mm. My husband would say everything. So because of my passion for the Book Love Foundation, I say yes to a lot of things that are donations or are free. And it seems so easy at first to say, oh, I'll go do that. And then it's in your schedule, which is pressure. And
Mm,
so you might open up a day in my week and see 5 different things I've agreed to do. And it's not that any of them aren't going to be good, but that I also have groceries to shop for,
hmm.
life. And so I
Yeah.
do tend to overcommit. I really have to work to leave days free in my schedule. And I need time to write because I still use my writing to do all kinds of work in the world. And I need time that's set aside for that because writing doesn't come easily. It's always a process. So
Right.
having my mornings to write is important, but they're often used up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I engage with a number of writers now in my network, given who I live with. What is how do you set up your writing space, the writing environment when it's time to write? Do you
Mm.
have a process or a formula that you use?
Okay, so that little chair over there,
Hmm.
where I sit, I have my writer's notebook. It's always by hand. That's how everything starts in my life. And right behind that chair are all books of poetry. And I always read poetry and it just gets my brain moving and I start writing. And my writing is not linear. It's all over the place. I write sideways. I write all because if I have this idea and it continues over here, but it's not part of this through line. And I allow myself to write any way that gets the work done. So as messily as someone else would look at it and say, that's so disorganized. And it might be to me as well. But to me, none of that matters. What matters
Hmm.
is can I find the place that's going to get this idea space enough to grow and to
Mm.
become something I can use. When I'm working on a book or a chapter, I am I work differently for the generation of it. The beginnings, I'm often in my notebook, or I will start in my notebook. I got to write that assessment chapter. So I'm going to write it in my notebook because I'm most comfortable. I relax. But then I always move to some kind of Word document or Google Doc, or, depending on if I'm collaborating. And then it becomes, there's a finished quality. When you open up your laptop and there's a document, for me personally, it's a finished, I'm working on a draft that looks done. That's very
Mm.
different than when I'm handwriting because I know it's not done. So I am a little more tense. And sometimes that focus is at the right time because I'm in edits or I'm responding to editorial feedback, and that's where it should be.
Yeah.
But I also know that those two parts are very different. And if I'm given an assignment or a question to answer in an article, I will play with it for quite a long time. And in my notebook, I'll even box it in colors so I can find all the pages where I wrote about that thing when I go back to try to start pulling it together.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite writing implement or brand of pens that you like to use?
I don't have one here. It's a super cheap little Pilot pen that has a black nib. And the problem is, for a long time, I wrote only in cartridge pens. So I have gorgeous cartridge pens, but I don't use them anymore. They often smear, all kinds of reasons. But that's one of my favorites. The problem is they're disposable. So when these run out, I'm not using them because the environment is in need of all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice thought. That's a very responsible thought. Yeah. Especially for someone who spends so much time out in the environment and benefits directly from enjoying it. What area in your life feels just about perfect?
It just has to be family time. It's, you have these bonds with people, and some of my best friends I would include as family, and they're people you make time for. We have started a tradition of traveling with my best friend from high school, who's still my best friend, and her husband. And we do that once a year, at least. That kind of time, it's the unstructured, what do you want to do? Have a glass of great wine, sit out on the deck until it's dark, that kind of stuff. Being able to be on this journey with my son and his daughters, and my daughter who's in her 4th year of teaching. So we have a lot to talk about. This journey of life is the greatest thing in my life.
That's fabulous. Does your daughter take in all of your words of wisdom at this early stage in her career?
So she didn't go to school to become a teacher. She actually graduated in public service. And so she looked at work in nonprofits, and then started working in charter schools to pay bills, and decided maybe she wanted to be a teacher. And her first couple of years, I think it was just too much to try to also listen to her mom. I may have had some lessons back in there, in her head somewhere, but she's terrific. She does not need my advice. In fact, she works with multilingual learners and has crafted some skills that I don't have. But for this most recent book I wrote, we got to teach her class together, co-teach it. And the kids called us Miss Kittle and Little Miss Kittle because she's only 5 feet tall. And I can't imagine a more powerful moment in my career than to teach side by side with my daughter. It was really incredible.
Wow. Yeah, I can only imagine. Would you, this is a recently published book, yes?
Yes, it came out in the fall, in November.
I thought so. Would you mind, or would you be willing to share a little bit about that book, that work in particular, of the many you've done so far?
It's called Micro Mentor Texts, and it is about taking the books that we all have in our classrooms that we love already and finding little passages that teach writing craft. So it might be like how writers organize, as I call it, artfully, the power of 3 or the list, and just showing students lots of examples of what that looks like through the eyes of Case and Callender, for example, who wrote King and the Dragonflies. And you pull out passages, you teach them how they work, you have kids imitate them. How do you imitate this move the list in your own work? And they start writing their own stories and ideas using the craft that authors use. So it's 8 craft moves and examples of each one. Lots of examples, because I worked with Scholastic, who has relationships with authors, and we got a lot of permissions I probably couldn't have gotten anywhere else. And it was a joy to write. It is a joy to share with teachers. They send me stuff all the time that their kids have done with the craft moves. So it's been really fun.
That's fantastic.
Hmm.
Who is someone you admire? You're allowed to change it from your original answer, but I'll remind you that you did say your husband. And what did you admire? What do you admire about them?
Pat just is He's so many things. He's this incredible friend. He's thoughtful. I got to tell you, we have had this tradition our whole married life where he will give me something as a Christmas gift and he'll say, this is going to make the top 10. And what he means is he has these gifts that have hit the top 10 because they are so thoughtful. So one time, for example, he knew I had been teaching at a university one book by Jonathan Kozol for years. So as my birthday was coming up, it was Christmas, he sent Jonathan Kozol a letter telling him about how much I loved his work, along with copies of my first two books, and sent him the copy I usually used in my teaching to sign it and return it. So on Christmas, I got a paperback book and he handed it to me and said, this is going to make the top 10. I was like, it can't. I know what it is. It's a paperback book. There's no book that's going to be that important. Inside the book was Jonathan's beautiful words to me, the letter that Pat had written him, and then he had responded with comments on my books. I mean, what a wonderful thing to do, right? And Pat does that not just for me, but for his kids, he's really observant and he's an incredible problem solver. So I think we often admire people who do things we can't do. And so problem solving, I do all kinds of that in my work, but not the kind of problem solving he does. He's an engineer by training, so he's always got stuff figured out that I wouldn't even know what questions to ask, but never carries that in an arrogant way. It's always just, isn't this kind of cool? That you can figure this out, or, he's building walls in the basement to do something else. And I don't know, I admire that he's always looking for a solution. He's not somebody who gets mired in the problem, but he's always looking for how do we fix it? How do we solve it?
Yeah. How do you make it better?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I can say I'm very fortunate enough to have gotten to know Pat a little bit while my family's time in your area was less than a calendar year, but I got to know him fairly well. And you're not lying. In case anyone thinks that you're a big fat liar. No, he's such a delightful man. So this checks out. This just enhances the story of Pat for me. So thank you for sharing that.
Uh-huh.
So what do you imagine that some people admire about you?
Yeah, that's always a much harder question. I think it's got to go back to I was not afraid to say to people I worked for that I either disagreed. There were principals who would bring in programs and say, this is, really early on, a principal who said to me, so your kids don't carry around this grammar book like the other teachers' kids do in 7th grade. How come? Right? And those things never scared me. It was like, ooh, I have an opportunity, right? I'm gonna convert her. And it was funny because she's a super powerful, very successful woman. And I was a young teacher. And I said, well, and I just opened up the grammar book and it was something like the inverted comma or some, I won't say it right, but some weird phrase. And I said, so tell me what this is. And she goes, she could tell it was like a little bit of a challenge. She kind of sat back and she went, I have no idea. And I said, and you are an amazing writer, a good communicator, professional woman, and you haven't had the need for that information. And what I'm telling you is that I'm going to work super hard to make our kids stronger readers and writers. But it is not about rules. It's about learning how language works in context. And that's what I'm going to focus on. And anytime you want to come see what that looks like, come on down. And then years later, in my own town here, the local paper published an editorial where the person attacked the spelling scores of kids in the district. And I wrote an article, an op-ed, if you will, for just to explain that I taught 8th grade at the high school or the middle school, high school, and that, the misunderstanding about these isolated skills and their impact and how kids learn to spell and all kinds of things. And then at the end, I said, and if you ever want to see what this looks like, please come and visit my classroom. And I knew it was going out to the entire town, right? Well, what I didn't know was that the former guru of writing read that editorial. He had retired to this area. In my work, Donald Graves' name just meant everything. He wrote a book that sold 250,000 copies in 1983. And he read parts of my editorial out loud at the national convention. And the only reason I knew that I didn't go was that a person in town told me, did you know he read from that editorial in his keynote speech to the national convention? And I was like, and it was moments like that you realize you can stand up. If you can back up what you're doing, you can stand up for this. Years later, I went to my principal, said, I'm only going to be gone an hour. I've got this meeting across town. Could you cover my class? And he said he would, but he happened to be covering it on a day when the kids were writing these reflections on their lives as readers. And he left my room and said, how did you make that happen? I didn't know that was going to happen, but it was like those moments when you say, I am just going to, this is too important. I'm going to show you what it means. And I'm willing to struggle with it in front of you. That doesn't scare me. What scares me is that we'll make the wrong decision. So I think what people admire is that I've always tried to change the world for kids as learners, and that I've been unafraid to do that.
One might say you were voracious about it.
Maybe they do. Maybe people use that word. You never know.
Well, I'm just gonna go ahead and go on record and say it.
There you go.
So you kind of alluded to this phenomenon that, age gives you maybe either more confidence in being able to say no, or just more wisdom, experience, what have you. What do you think it was about you as a younger professional that made you feel confident enough or give you the nerve to speak up then, compared to now you can do so based off of empirical research and again, all these experiences that you've been a part of?
That's the trickiest question you've asked me yet. So I'm trying to think back when I became a really serious tennis player in late middle school. I had been playing for years, and I started playing in tournaments, and I was good. And I think a lot of it, I was 13 when I started high school because my parents put me in kindergarten early, and I made the varsity tennis team for what is now a 5A school. And they had never had a freshman on the team. And there was something about that. I was tall by the end of freshman year, and I was a good athlete that gave me a lot of confidence.
Yeah, that's
all I can trace it to. I was a lazy student in high school. I mean, really, you think about the other parts of my life, I wasn't necessarily going to be anything except that you have to have a lot of courage to play in a match with all eyes on you. And it's, the team wins or loses based on what you do that day. And it's also an individual sport. You're on a team, but you're individually responsible. I married a Division I track, very excellent runner. And both of us talk about that idea that when you're playing or in a sport where it's all on you, that does change you a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we both played sports where we were in teams, and it's a little different.
Sure. Well, it sounds like as a individual contributor or a high achiever in a space where maybe you weren't expected to, you lived the experience that, hey, I'm doing a thing that most people thought I couldn't. So maybe it just showed you that it is possible. Not only is it possible that you're doing it. So maybe that gave you, I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, it's true that our family didn't have any money. We were a very struggling family, and there were a lot of kids with private coaches and, memberships at clubs in town, because I was in Portland, Oregon, that certainly had a reason to be more confident than I did. Right. I was really trying to scratch my way to the top. Yeah. And so I think there is something about that. I also, it's funny, middle school, there was no girls basketball team. So my best friend and I tried out for the boys team because Title IX, was going to say these things are equal, but hadn't come to our town. Sure. And I said, when we tried out, he did not want us on the team, but her dad called, and her dad had political influence, and he had to put us on the team. And it was really miserable. I mean, he would never turn the lights on in the locker room. He would make us sit on the bench and wait for one of the other boys to decide we could be on their team. And then he even went so far as to say he had no uniforms for us, and we couldn't sit with the team at the first game because we didn't have uniforms on. So we had to sit up in the stands. I mean, it was just horrible, but
Oh my gosh.
there was something about that. Like, you aren't stopping us. My dad used to laugh that I'd sleep on curlers at night and I was like trying to be the girl, but then I would show up and play hard on the boys' basketball team, like it was, I don't know. Maybe I was a fighter from the get-go. I don't know.
It certainly sounds like it. And I bet if we spent more time on it, we could go a little further back, likely, right? Or if I had the benefit of your parents' vision or view on it, they would probably share some things as well. Yeah, that's great. Penny, what other thoughts do you have on living intentionally, or anything else you'd like to share in the name of intention?
I think that no one's going to give you permission lots of times to do the thing you most want to do. And you have to figure out what that is. And for me, it was always that I wanted to create these experiences for young kids that would lead them to have lives of joy. And how was I going to create that if I was trapped in a system that wouldn't allow it, right? So pushing back against that became super important. And there is, I think for so many people, COVID woke them up to, I'm in a job that I don't like, and maybe it's time that I make a change. And there was a lot of movement across different professions, and one of those is teaching. And there's never been a time when we've needed teachers more than we do now. And so I just think, if somebody's out there thinking, I always wondered if I could do that, that you might find that you could, and that you would find joy there. Because people will say, why would anyone want to be a teacher right now? And I'm always like, because it is the greatest work there is. You get to be with 25 or however many young people day after day, and they are filled with hope. And they are constantly going to surprise you and just make life brighter. So I think part of what we all have to do is say, we got limited amount of time on this planet, right? We don't have time to waste. We don't know how much we have, but we don't have time to waste. And let's do something that makes us live as fully as we would want our kids to live.
That is awesome. That is very refreshing, especially in particular about the teaching profession, right? Because that's not typically the narrative for as long as I can remember,
Yeah.
But yeah, the permission to pursue what you think you even might want to do, whether you know it or not. You're right. No one's just going to give it to you. But it sounds like, Penny Kittle, you are giving everyone listening to this conversation the permission to pursue what they're interested in. Is that quoting you correctly?
For sure. Yes.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. I thought so. I want to thank you for the time and for that careful consideration of my questions and sharing a little bit about you and your insights and experience. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful.
This has been Intentionally Ever After, hosted by intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek. If you would like to have your own intentional conversation with Joe on or off the air, visit intentionallyeverafter.com. Thanks for listening.